Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our OSPF December webinar. Our topic today is the stress of agriculture and farming and how mental health professionals and communities can support farmers during difficult times. My name is Emily Steinberg, and I am the communications coordinator here at the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation, and I have the privilege of hosting today's presentation. I am excited to welcome Bridget Britton and Sarah Noggle from Ohio State. Thank you, ladies, both so much for being here. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items that I want to go over. After today's webinar, I'm going to send everyone a follow-up email with a link to the post-webinar survey and the presentation slides. This survey is going to be required for anyone who would like to receive CE credits or a certificate of attendance. I do want to note that those CE credits are only available to OSPF members, but anyone can receive the attendance certificate. I'll also include a link in that email with information about how to become a member if you are interested, and all certificates will be sent within 30 days. At about 10:45, we're going to start the Q&A session. So you all are encouraged to submit your questions either through the chat or the Q&A feature throughout the presentation and when we get to the Q&A time. And I'll keep track of these questions and moderate them for Bridget and Sarah. We do have quite a few people in the room today, so hopefully we'll be able to get through all of the questions. Now, let me introduce you to today's speakers. Starting with Bridget. Bridget Britton is the Behavioral Health Field Specialist in the Family and Consumer Sciences program area at The Ohio State University, serving the entire state. She is a graduate of Mount Nazarene University with a Bachelor of Social Work and a Master of Social Work from Azusa Pacific University. Bridget's primary focus is on supporting the Farm Stress Initiative and raising awareness among those in agriculture about the importance of stress's impact on a person. She works daily to try to break down the barriers and stigma that keep rural Ohioans from seeking mental health treatment. She works to educate every person on spotting the warning signs and symptoms of mental health challenges and how to support someone in need. Bridget is trained to teach adult, youth, and teen mental health first aid, QPR, and trauma-informed approaches. And Sarah. Sarah Noggle has served as the Agriculture and Natural Resources Educator for OSU Extension in Paulding County since 2013. She specializes in farm management, farm succession planning, farm stress, soil health, and cover crops. She is a lifelong farmer with her husband Ryan, continuing their multi-generational family farm, raising corn, soybeans, and wheat while actively involving their two children. In 2024, Sarah was honored as the Conservation Educator of the Year by the Ohio No-Till Council for her outstanding leadership in promoting sustainable agriculture. She also serves in key leadership roles with the Ohio Women in Agriculture, the Ohio Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, the Midwest Cover Crop Council, and the Natural Soil Health Nexus. Sarah is certified instructor for youth, adult, and teen mental health first aid, QPR, trauma-informed approaches, and ambiguous loss, empowering individuals, communities to support mental wellness in rural America. All right, ladies, thank you so much for presenting today, and you can begin whenever you are ready.
Great. Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. So like she said, I'm Bridget Britton, and I do like to share that I live on the eastern side of the state, which is just very different than Sarah. So she'll kind of share where she lives. I do not come from a farming background, but I have developed a love and a passion for the agriculture community. My husband does work with farmers on a daily basis in his role and his position. So we kind of balance each other out very well. I always joke that I should have listened to him a little bit more as I have came into this role. And I asked him a couple years ago if he ever thought that I'd become this passionate about rural and farm stress. And he was like, absolutely not. So I love this role. I love doing the work that I do, and I love working with Sarah. So, yeah, like she said, I do have a master's in social work. I am a licensed counselor, but I don't do that. I don't practice currently in my position. So, Sarah, is there anything else you want to say about yourself?
Nope, I'm just from the northwest corner of the state, and I think Emily just described a little bit about me already. So we'll turn it back over to you, Bridget.
Yeah, do you want to go to the first slide here? So these are some of our objectives for today. We really want to help you all identify the key stress factors that are affecting farmers, because they are very different than what affects us as just the traditional person. I do live in a rural community, as does Sarah, and so some of ours are similar, right? But they are very different if you're a farmer. Sarah will be able to attest to that, as she will be able to give some key insights. And then recognizing signs of chronic stress, because there is different chronic stress living in a rural and agriculture community, and then the anxiety and depression within that agriculture community. And then being able to spot the barriers that stop farmers from seeking treatment. They are different in the farming and agriculture community than what they may be in the urban setting. And then hoping and helping that you all will be able to apply some practical tools and finding that cultural competence when approaching and engaging to support the farmers, because they are truly just a different group of people that really need to be, met where they are. So we hope that you will get that today. So when we look at Ohio, some people will say, well, Ohio, isn't really that rural, right? And depending on where you live, some of you here may live in not a very rural community. And please feel free to put in the chat, where are you located? We love to hear where people are located, right? I said I'm in the eastern side of the state. Sarah lives in Northwest Ohio. So feel free to put in the chat, do you live in a rural community? Do you not live in a rural community? We love hearing that from people. Where are you from? Where are you located? Because we've taught trainings like this, and we hear all over the place where people are coming.
We've
Um,
got Warren and Clinton counties, Noble County, Paulding County, Muskegon, Cuyahoga, Franklin,
Yeah. So we have
lots.
a quite a mix. Yeah. And my Carroll County, I have to shout them out. I used to work in Carroll County. And I just read a really big article about Carroll County that I'm going to talk about in just a little bit. But you can see the state here. So the purple. I'm really tired. I told Sarah this morning. I was on the radio early this morning, and as much as I would love to be on the radio, not the early morning show. I need to do the afternoon drive. So the green counties are the rural counties, the predominant rural counties. And then the blue counties are the ones that are the Appalachian or Appalachia, however you choose to say them. So they're the historic counties. So those all make up the rural counties in the state of Ohio. So you could see that it's a large percentage of Ohio that make up that rural county. But, the Appalachian counties, they go all the way through all of West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and they go all the way down, Mississippi, all of those. So you'll see it's not just West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky. It goes way down further than what we realize. And, when you think about a rural county, many people think, oh, well, there must be some kind of definition that the United States Department of Agriculture gives. When in fact, when Sarah and I first started doing this work, it was we couldn't find one. We couldn't find a set definition. So you'll see in the corner that there are a few different definitions that the USDA or the United States Department of Agriculture does use. But in general, there are no set definitions when it comes to that. So typically, how they define a rural county is that there is no metropolitan city. So thinking about Franklin County, Columbus, Toledo, Cleveland, Cincinnati, right? There is no metropolitan city in that county. And the infrastructure. So, my friend on the call that's from Carroll County, right? There is not going to be the growth, the two-lane highway for a Walmart or places like that, right? There is just not going to be the ability for the growth that maybe some other counties will have. Like I said, I live in the eastern side of the state. I live in Tuscarawas County. We're getting all the things. We're getting a Chick-fil-A. We're so excited. So we have that growth that's coming. We're apparently a micropolitan town. I don't know. So that's a new word I've never heard of. So, but we're still considered a rural and Appalachian county in Tuscarawas County. And yeah, so there are definitions. The infrastructure is not there in these counties, and then they have low graduation rates and then low income rates, lower than average when you look at it across the country. So those are some definitions that they use at the USDA, again, United States Department of Agriculture, to help define what is a rural county. And then when you look at the Appalachian counties, those are just the even more historically or chronically lower, right? We're talking 100 plus years of low graduation, ninth grade education, maybe even less. We're talking about very low education, a high poverty rates across the United States. So those are just the struggle to get out of that. And so you can see that a large portion, and sometimes we even use a map that kind of bleeds through there because there is a lot more farming land, even in the places like Franklin County. So when we talk about what are some of the stressors that are different, you can put in the chat, what are some of the stressors that are different when we look at the farming community versus maybe what I have as not a farmer or that you might not have as a farmer? What are some of the stressors? We want to hear from you. Tariff struggles, yeah, absolutely. Hard physical labor, weather, seed prices, grain, isolation, weather dependent. What else? No rain, too much rain, lack of resources. Lack of resources can be whether it's farming equipment or support to get what they need or other things when it comes to mental health, machine breakdowns, resources, financial resources. Sarah's going to talk a lot about some of the more intense struggles, physically demanding. Yeah, so you all keep putting them in the chat. We're going to move on to the next one. Lack of control over a lot. Yeah. So these stressors are unique to the farming community, um, as opposed to what we might struggle with, right? Like our livelihood can be largely dependent on what we do, and it can be physical labor. But a lot of what we do, somebody put in here health insurance if sick, right? The job that I have has health insurance. So if I get sick, I do have health insurance to help support me. But the lack of access to mental health care because of the rural environment, right? That's a big one. And I'm not as isolated in my job as some other people are if they're in the farming community. So yeah, absolutely. There is the difference. There is the unique stressors that the agriculture community has on top of traditional farming or traditional stressors that they already have. No time off for sick days. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you are sick, those animals still need fed, right? You still need to go out and harvest your crop. It doesn't matter. You can go to the next slide. So we're going to watch a video. We love this video, and some of you talked about weather, but Aaron Wilson, he introduces himself, does a really great job of explaining the weather, even to the point that we didn't really think about it at the time that we first watched this video. So we're going to watch this short video.
Hi everybody, I'm Aaron Wilson, OSU Extension Climate Specialist and Atmospheric Research Scientist here at The Ohio State University. I'm here today to talk about weather and climate and how both of these create stress on our farmers. Farmers are very in tune with the weather conditions, natural meteorologists I'd say. But throughout the season, farmers' activities and their stress level really hinge upon the types of conditions that we're seeing. So what we want to do today is explore the ways that weather can impact the season, the growing season decisions that need to be made, from what types of varieties to plant, when to plant, when to harvest, am I getting enough water on my crops, can I avoid frost before my crops reach maturity. These are all the types of questions that weather really plays in on a farmer's life. And we'll also look at the long-term changes in our climate and how they're creating an environment of increased stress in farmers' lives today. So let's go ahead and explore some of the many facets that weather and climate have on the stress and the health of our farmers. All right, so before we talk specifics, let's talk a little bit about weather and climate. Now, weather refers to the rapid changes in our atmospheric conditions like temperature, wind speed, and moisture. And it's the rapid change and the rapid characteristic that really can cause a lot of stress in a farmer's day. Let's take an example, for instance. Typical summertime conditions, you might have about a 20% chance of rainfall for your county. That doesn't mean that everywhere we're going to see rainfall in the county. It's a good bet you're not going to see that rainfall. But if you happen to be that farmer in an area picking up a heavy isolated storm when you're trying to apply pesticide, herbicides, or plant that day, it can really ruin your day. Now, farmers are resilient. Obviously, they roll with the punches when it comes to the weather conditions. But when you string several of these very wet days along in a row, you can see how the stress starts to mount as those necessary planting days start to wane a bit. Now, on the flip side, climate refers to the slower varying aspects of our climate, of changes in temperature and moisture over a long period of time. And we're seeing changes here in Ohio that are having a big impact on our farmers' lives. For the globe, 2020 was the second warmest year on record going back to 1880. Now, closer to home, 8 out of the top 10 wettest and 8 out of the top 10 warmest years in Ohio have all occurred since 1990. So indeed, farmers are farming today in a wetter and a warmer reality, okay? And that's causing a lot more added stress as we move forward in time here. So these long-term changes impact a lot of decisions. They come down to a lot of the timing decisions of planting and harvesting and what types of crops to grow. So we're going to explore now a little bit more of heat-related and also precipitation-related impacts that these long-term changes are having on our farmers here across Ohio. So let's first explore the impacts from heat and humidity. Obviously, with warming temperatures, that creates a situation where we get more evaporation at the surface and we get more water vapor in our atmosphere. And the combination of that heat and humidity really cause extra physical and mental stress on our farmers. You know, working outdoors with a higher humidity doesn't feel very great, and that can really take a toll on our mental health and the physical health of our farmers across the state. It also increases the stress of our livestock. So livestock farmers are having to contend with making sure that the livestock have adequate cooling needs, and sometimes that means building additional structures or additional cooling capacity, and that can cause economic stress as well. So you can see that's just an example of the compounding impacts of weather and climate on even our economic stress here of the farmers. Another way increasing temperatures really impact our farmers is in the introduction of insects and disease and weed species. Some of these we haven't really experienced here historically in Ohio, but as our temperatures warm, we get expansion of non-native insects and different species into the region, and that can really wreak havoc across our fields and lead to added stress of managing for those pests and diseases as well. And finally, another thing to really consider with temperature is temperature variability. You know, one thing that makes farming successful is really a stable climate. And what we have right now is a very extreme, chaotic climate, one where we see a lot of extreme variability in temperature. For instance, we see these late season warm events in February that can cause plants to break dormancy early, can cause insects to also emerge a little bit early and get ahead of some of our crops as well. If you're a fruit and vegetable farmer, fruit farmers that have blossoms that bloom early in the season are still susceptible to those late season freezes, those polar vortex outbreaks that we talk about that bring that extreme cold weather down into North America. And so year after year of those losses due to extreme temperatures can really start to take a toll on our vegetable and our fruit farmers across the state. All right, so let's turn our attention now to precipitation. In Ohio, precipitation has increased anywhere from 5 to 15% since the early 20th century. Seasonal changes in precipitation are even larger in some areas, up to 35%, for instance, in the fall across north central Ohio. So let's take a little march throughout the year and see how precipitation trends in each of the seasons are impacting the stress that our farmers are dealing with. Now, if we look at our winter time, of course, we're seeing a big increase in the amount of rainfall, but winters are also warmer, and that means that fields are not freezing as often, and we get muddier conditions, and that can certainly impact the health of our livestock, putting additional stress there on our livestock farmers. The wetter fields during winter also lead to conditions in early spring where our fields are not really becoming conditioned for planting in time, at least not what we'd like to see, or certainly any of that early planting. And so it can be a struggle from time to time. As a matter of fact, since 1995, Ohio has lost 5 days of suitable fieldwork conditions during the month of April. That's a pretty steep downward trend, and it's causing stress on farmers when they have to do a lot more field work in a limited amount of time. Of course, as we get through spring and we're continuing to see that rainfall, planting can become an issue. We get into the summertime and conditions again change a bit. June and overall summer, we're still seeing the increase in the precipitation, but July and August are offering downward trends in our precipitation, or even flat conditions where we're not seeing big trends. And so what you can find is rapidly changing conditions. Perhaps the farmer had a great planting season, a great first half of the growing season, and they watched that crop wither away to extreme intense drought over just a matter of a few weeks as that heat comes on, strong evaporation, removing the moisture from the surface, and a lack of rainfall. So at the same time that we can get heavier downpours because we have more water vapor in the atmosphere, that strong evaporation can really remove the moisture from the surface quite readily. Again, we see these 2, 3, 4, even 5-inch rainfall amounts in just a single hour, and that's devastating some of our fields. It's leading to erosion of soil, flushing of our nutrients into the waterways, and of course there's increasing public pressure on water quality in our waterways, and the agricultural community feels a lot of that intense pressure. These heavy rainfall and flushing events are largely outside their control. Now, there are a lot of things that farmers are doing to shore up that soil, control drainage structures, and the different things that they're trying to implement on their farming practices to help mitigate those losses, but still they're feeling the stress from those waterways and the water quality in those rivers and streams. And finally, looking at fall, again, fall tends to be a bit drier, especially as we get into October. But one of the big wild cards here is we know that climate change is causing our strongest hurricanes, our tropical systems, those Cat 4s, Cat 5s, to be more frequent and more intense. And we're seeing these events where we see 35, 40, 65 inches of rainfall along the coast of the southeast United States. And depending on whether that moisture gets streamed up in Ohio, we can see some really big events during fall. And of course, wet conditions in fall will delay harvest. It will lead to some crop issues and the quality of the crop the longer it stays out into the field. And of course, that then causes more stress, more pressure on the farmers to get the crops harvested in a timely fashion. So you can see precipitation has a big impact on the stress and health of our farmers throughout the entire year. So in summary, there are many ways throughout the year that farmers are feeling the stress due to weather conditions. Perhaps familiarizing ourselves with the seasonal cycle of agricultural production and seasonal weather stressors attributed to these activities can help all of us cope with and also provide support to those that are experiencing hard times. So let's take a second to review throughout the year. Again, in the spring, we're dealing a lot with wet and lingering cold spring conditions that can limit the ability to plant in a timely fashion. A lot of times this forces our farmers long hours, to work long hours throughout the night in order to catch up. Repeated cycles of replanting fields due to heavy rain events or slow emergence can really start to take a toll on the mental health of our farmers across the state. During the summertime, we're dealing with both periods of too hot and dry, and also too little or too much rainfall as well. These heavy precipitation events, again, leading to complete losses in our fields at times, and really the inability to replant in time to ensure maturity. Persistent work to keep weeds at bay, to stay ahead of insect pressure, also leading to additional stress, also leading to additional economic pressure as you need those herbicides and pesticides and continual changes to the treatment in order to stay ahead of different varieties and different species. Rapid transition to drought conditions, right? Those rapid changing conditions where things look good, but ultimately they're going to impact our yields and our bottom line. Hot extremes, again, leading to that daytime labor issue in terms of being out in the heat and humidity that can really start to take its toll. As we get into fall, again, extreme precipitation events leading to delayed harvest or poor crop quality. The inability to really accomplish activities to prepare the fields for winter, and that can delay activities into the winter or even the following spring. And also, as we head into winter, it's cloudy. Here in Ohio, it's cloudy a lot, and that really causes seasonal depression in many folks across all walks of life, farmers included. So those cloudy days that stack up from November through March can really start to take its toll. Persistent muddy conditions during the winter, impacting livestock, impacting those activities outside, and also worries that come with abnormally warm late season conditions that lead to early dormancy breaks and weeds and insects getting ahead of us. So there's a lot of seasonal stressors on our farmers throughout the year, and hopefully this information has been helpful. So ultimately, we all deal with stress in our daily lives. But hopefully the information that I've covered here today will help you think about the seasonal cycle of agricultural production, the life of a farmer, and the types of weather stressors that come along with those seasons that make mental health a challenge for farmers and all of us. I want to thank you for your time and good luck.
And we're just so thankful for Aaron for taking the time to do this video. I think one of the things that we want to point out, sorry, I have the hiccups. One of the things we want to point out, Sarah would agree that this was filmed before the drought that we had 2 years ago, right? Two years ago.
The last 2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago. And then we had a little mini drought last year that didn't help the drought we had 2 years ago. So we won't go into detail about that, but if it's something you're interested in, we could provide more information later.
So I think when we talk about, the peak stress points in agriculture and what's next, when we think about this as a community member and trying to support our rural communities and those in agriculture, think about what are the major stress points in agriculture and how should we respond? Where do those greatest pressures occur and what actually comes next? And then and I'm going to share some of these, what are the key challenges facing agriculture today and what steps should be taken basically just to say, how can I work in that community? And what are the very critical stress factors in agriculture and how do we move forward? So when I think about this, and I'm not an artist on this next slide, but I think of someone hauling hay to a field and that farm stress load on farmers, their families, as Aaron shared, just puts them in the top 10 most stressful occupations in the US. And again, while we shared stress as part of that living, it's the distress, the overload of stressors that puts those individual health, family relationships, and farming at risk. We've seen in the chat box just some of the different things, and people are sharing some of those stories. And again, every farm is different, but every community has some of those. I'm going to show you kind of that overload in that. But again, thinking about this in generational differences. And so as we look at the different parts, there's those generational differences on our farm. Again, our average age of our farmer across the United States is around 72 years old. And when you think about that, most people have retired by that time. But again, when you look at the younger generation taking over the farm, the financial input. Again, we make a joke in the community. There used to be old money in our communities where our farmers, but those generational differences makes it harder and harder. The cost of production is higher and higher. And when I talk about production, that means, can I raise that crop? Can I raise that livestock to the full capacity? The risk that it takes. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a farmer that if something happens like one of those weather stressors, how would you function if you knew half your income for the year was destroyed and there was no warning? And could you survive? Again, with sometimes no backup. But additionally, we see that generational differences where our farm families They are working an off-farm job. Number one, maybe for health insurance. Maybe it's just because the financial input. Or traditionally, we saw 25, 35 years ago that if there was a marriage, that spouse stayed home and helped on the farm. Again, we don't see that as much because of the cost of health insurance. One of the health insurance statistics that I'll share is that the average, if you are 100% employed on your farm, you don't have off-farm income, and you have to take out self-employment health insurance, that the average cost of that for a family is around $1,742 a month. That's a high deductible of $5,000 every month. The other thing that we need to help our communities understand is that farming, you're not just paid every week or every 2 weeks or once a month like some of us are. It's that time when you've sold grain and you have to budget that, or sold your livestock to receive that income. So again, it might seem like on paper there's a lot of money there, but sometimes farmers, depending on the type of farm you are, sell grain twice a year or sell livestock once a year. And that has to last that income the entire year. But again, when those other factors come in. So this hay wagon, when we think about it, there's a lot of things coming at farmers. Mortgage payments are due. Your weeds are out of control. Insurance costs increase. Chronic back and neck pain. Again, maybe you can handle that for a short time. Lack of sleep, depending on the time of the year. When we start to think about all these different factors, marketing fees, the highly pathogenic avian influenza that someone shared in the chat box, and again, thinking through these things as everything stacks up, that sacrifice of personal time for the farm. Again, how many times do we hear that farm families miss their own youth, their activities and events because the livestock need fed before? An insect comes in and ruins a crop. Your mother-in-law, who maybe was your child care provider, becomes ill, and now all of a sudden you're left with bringing youth to the farm. Again, you injure your back, therefore it changes that. There's a lack of labor, and that's huge right now in agriculture, that we can't find people who want to work, or who want to work sometimes those long hours. Then all of a sudden, we think about the tight profit margin, where our crop prices, our livestock prices are not as high as they were. And again, the cost of production is the same. You have equipment breakdown, and all these things, government regulation comes piling up. But I share that farmers are kind of like my superheroes. They can handle so much, but when that kryptonite gets there, everything comes crashing down. They're under high stress. Sometimes they can't think correctly. So what lies ahead for our US agriculture when we think about that? The market uncertainty and price volatility. For example, when we talk about corn prices, the break-even price for a corn crop is $3.50. We are barely above that, and that's per bushel sold. But again, when you look at that, the Chicago Board of Trade price yesterday, and I didn't look it up, was around 440. Again, that's in Chicago, but again, getting that crop marketed and sent to a location, you take those hits because of trucking and those things. So when you look at that, some of our farmers are not even breaking even. That financial distress related to cash flow and net worth that I shared. When we talk about stressful conditions resulting in mental and physical health issues, I share in our community one of the issues that's come up recently in Northwest Ohio is that childcare, that people, um, they love to be done when school is out watching children, those people who are babysitting. But when you think about agriculture, it's not just a 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. job or a 9 to 5. Sometimes that's 5:30 in the morning that you're starting off, if you have livestock or dairy cows, and it can be till 9, 10 o'clock at night. And again, that balance. Have you ever thought about being that good neighbor and caring for those kids, or saying, hey, once a month I can babysit one night, or bringing that extra meal to those farm families? Again, those are so hard. And on top of that, when we look at people working off farm due to the cost, well, one of those underlying things that we share is this phenomenon called an agrarian imperative. And this agrarian imperative is a concept that holds farmers where they're going to cling to their land, their resources. They're going to protect that, their water, their equipment, all the things that are essential to maintaining the overall farming operation, basically the survival. We have a clinical psychologist who is also a farmer who has been studying this for over 40 years. And he shares, Dr. Michael Rossman shares, the loss of land is so detrimental to a farmer because of the tremendous guilt associated if you are that generation to lose the farm. If you're not able to pass that farm along to your descendants, it's a very desperate situation. Our farmers will do whatever they need to keep their land. They will sell things, they will go into bankruptcy type situations, they will give up things. Um, they won't take vacations because protecting that is at their key. Rossman also said that farmers need to look at behavioral health as something to be managed just similarly to their land. They should take care of themselves so they can be a successful farmer. Sometimes that means getting help despite those social stigmas. So, what do the personality factors of a successful farmer look like when we think about that? Um, and again, with our limited time, I'd usually have you share in the chat box. What do you think of if you know a farmer? What are their personality factors? But they desire to cling to the land. They have tendency to trust their judgment. They rely on their local resources, but they do have a tendency to take more risks. They have the capacity to work alone if necessary, or if not, um, they can work with others. But again, they're used to being isolated and working alone. But those characteristics also work against a farmer in the time of stress. They don't often reach out when they are in trouble, or they don't realize that. One of the things that Dr. Rossman shares when he studied that was he looked at Mahaska County's Dutch heritage, okay, and that is a um, county in North Dakota, and then he compared that to the Netherlands, and he shared that the Netherlands farmers um, were aware of the necessity to hang on to the land, but even recently, some of them have come to the United States to operate dairy farms. So, this small country, the Netherlands, is the second largest exporter of vegetables of any country in the world aside from the US. He said that they have this powerful capacity to produce their food, and they do all this while being 800 miles south of the Arctic Circle. They make things work because they want that crop to be produced on their land. They have developed their own technology as well, but they also have the highest rate of suicide among farmers. There's a lot of strife for farmers who lose the land to all types of things. When you shared, I saw that um, in the chat box, things like solar and wind and those different things in our communities, when we're taking out that prime farmland, again, that next generation, it might be easier just to sell that. And again, there's a price for all those things. But when you think about producing food, where will we be in 50 years? These difficult are very difficult events, even for our farm people. They don't want to lose their land. They know they'll probably have to compromise. But again, they concluded that and Rossman shared from all his research, it's not in a farmer's nature to give up his land. Instead, it's in his nature to produce the maximum food and take care of the land if at all possible. And again, I know that Bridget shared Dr. Rossman's book. It is a great, he has two of them, and they are out. He just produced a new one last year, and they are a great read for those of you wanting to understand more about this. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Bridget, and we're going to talk a little bit about a deep topic for each one of you of suicide.
Yeah, and I also will say about Dr. Rossman and talking about as a from a clinical lens, it was so easy for me when you hear the stresses that the farming community has to just say, right, well, why don't you quit your job, right? Like find something else. And as she shared, they're not going to, right? It's just not in their nature. And so working with them to find other ways to cope with the stress and deal with the stress. But you don't know what you don't know, right? And I learned that the hard way. And so that's what we hope something you'll take out of this today. So this is some statistics that I got from the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation. This is a 2023 statistics that suicide rates are nearly twice as great in most rural communities compared to the United States and as in urban areas. And from 2020 to 2021, the number of deaths by drug position was 27% females and 5% for males. And so lethal means firearms was the leading mechanism of suicide among both females and males. And in the agriculture community and the rural community, they have a much higher access to firearms than Kara, I was going to bring that up in just a minute here. Suicide in Ohio, 15 of the top 16 counties led suicide rates in 2023. Now, this is per 100,000 people. So, if you're a statistician like my husband, he would say, well, counties like Carrollton and Tuscarawas, they don't even have 100,000 people. But still, it is worth noting. So yes, Carroll County just came out with an article yesterday that they are outpacing the rest of the state of Ohio twice as much in not in suicide deaths, but in calls to 911 with mental health concerns and suicide related concerns. And in Tuscarawas County, all the way back in March, they had already matched suicide deaths in March for the year the year previously. And for some unknown reason, it was all males. There was 22 deaths by suicide, and they were all males this past year, all the way to March. I don't know what the current statistic is. And as Sarah said, it is a predominantly male-dominated field in farming. So, yeah, just some things to think about. You can go to the next slide. So, how can we support and locate resources specific to this population? I think really, you can go, I think, even to the next slide, Sarah, right? For this, I think really it's about really first realizing the issues, right? The attitudes, the perceptions, right? People think I don't need help, right? And those few that do want to go get help, because I've talked to a lot of farmers since taking this job 5 years ago, the family members and friends of the people that do want to get help will say, I don't, my family thinks I'm crazy for wanting to go get help, and what I challenge those people is, well, they're crazy for saying that you don't need to go get help, right? And that might not be the best language to use, but it's like, I would rather you go get help than listen to your family, right? And there's still so much stigma around getting the help and support. There's still stigma around. My husband and I go get therapy, and he is not comfortable sharing about it, just from the male perspective, right? Of talking about to other males. And of course, the accessibility, if you live somewhere like Carroll County, even Tuscarawas County, I live in the very southern tip of Tuscarawas County. There's no mental health services in Tuscarawas in southern Tuscarawas County, so I have to drive somewhere. So if you don't have transportation, you have to find a way to get there. So accessibility and availability, right? You have to wait weeks and weeks and maybe months to get to somebody. Like we go to Coshocton County for our therapy, and we live in Tuscarawas County, so we have to drive 30 minutes to go see our therapist. And the cost and insurance coverage. So I'm thankful for Ohio State. I only have to pay a $20 copay. My husband, who works for the federal government, his copay is $100 a session. So thinking about somebody who has insurance pays $100 a session. So thinking about a farmer who does not have insurance or, pays out of pocket for insurance, they may not be covered for mental health services. And then like I said, the social networks and support systems, you don't want to assume things about people, but it's about us breaking down that barriers and finding those social supports and networks. And we do have some really great farmer advocates out there, but they're few and far between that are supporting their friends and family and coworkers in the farming community to say it's okay to not be okay. So recognizing those barriers are out there, and lack of internet availability. Yeah. So if you want to do telehealth, if telehealth is available, it is. When we first moved here to where we live, we had to get a thing that was like you can only have so many gigabytes, and then after that, it was like gone. You didn't have any. So Yeah, you want to go to the next slide?
Sure.
So do you want to take on this one?
Sure.
Practical tools? Yeah.
So I think when we think about what are the practical tools to help engage, meet farmers where they're at, both physically and mentally. Again, realizing that there are different ways that you can support in your communities. Realizing that sometimes it's those after hours type clinics if you're in a local area, or again, because of some of those stigmas, again, it's getting better. And I will say it's better
Hmm.
than it was 5 years ago, but saying, okay, well, there's nothing else for my family to do, or who's watching me when I'm going into such and such of a clinic to work with this, or my therapist. It's not convenient. Did you think about maybe going for after hours? One time a month and opening that up to your rural community. Again, not that they'll always take that support, but using that or going through and finding those partner agencies that are already working with farmers to promote mental health. And I think, realizing that if there was a 3 month wait to get into a counselor for a first time, and that doesn't mean that that counselor even works for that person. So I think thinking through those. So some of the partners that we want to share in our community, whether it's your local extension office, not everyone is working in mental health in your county extension offices, but they know how to connect to those of us on a team. There's also organizations that are supporting farmers that are very supportive of the mental health type topics. Our farm bureaus, our National Farmers Union, our Ohio Cattlemen's Association, our Ohio Dairy Producers, Soybean Council, Ohio Corn and Wheat Association, our Ohio Agribusiness, Ohio Pork, our Veterinary Medicine Coalition, our Farm Credit, our Ag Credit, our farm service agencies, our Department of Agriculture across the state, and our Natural Resources Conservation Service offices are all there to be support. But again, it's sometimes we don't like to talk about those things in our rural
Hmm.
communities. And I think it's hard when we look at that. One of the things that we do want to step in and say, and Bridget and I get the opportunity to teach, and I call it an opportunity, things like teen mental health first aid. And I think starting with that younger generation to share some of those things. We're in classrooms right now going through those things and helping break down those stigmas in our rural communities. If you're a support, going into one of those classes as an awareness, I say as a farmer, a farm wife, as a parent, as a community member, as someone who's involved in the community, there are things that wasn't my training. My training was crops and livestock, and formerly I was a high school agriculture teacher, and I shared those things that I should have known those things as a teacher, but I had no idea.
Hmm.
So when we talk about farm-specific suicide warning signs, clear to your friend. Again, when you're in that community, I always say, be that good neighbor. Sometimes you'll hear that directly. I'm going to kill myself. And these are part of our QPR, our question, persuade, refer for farmers and ranchers, where we've taken some of these, and some of these are personal things we've had. Sometimes coded to a son, don't be surprised if I die in a tractor rollover. I think those are things that we need to think about. One of the things that, as I work with farmers in the community, you know, one of the farmers said, I never thought when you talked about this that I would ever be in that situation. But coded to a spouse, he said, my spouse had been working and said, I've made this. She started making this detailed list of their sows, which are their mother pigs on a farm with the babies, that she had left it in the feed room. And she said she kept telling him these things, pay closest attention to this one and this one and this one. But things had been rough and there was a suicide attempt, but he knew what to do just by the 15 minutes in a session we've had. Thinking about a banker, if you foreclose today, you'll be seeing my obituary next week. Um, Again, giving away prized possessions coded to a friend. If I should pass away, I want you to have my old Winchester 12 gauge. And coded to a financial advisor or loan officer, what happens to my debt if I die? If I die, can my mother cash in on my life insurance policy? Again, when you think about those, again, and looking at your rural communities, sometimes it's just those things like you've shared, the connections on how do I get that financial support. It's not easy. There's not an HR department with a lot of those health um, plans, or it's an automated system and they're not always open. It's that early hours to not late at night when people are making those phone calls. Again, looking at that in your rural communities. So I know we're going to start with a Q&A, and I think Emily, you're going to go through some of that. So we're
Yes.
going to pull into this the question part for a
Yes,
few minutes.
we already have two questions that came through. So we'll start with one from Chelsea. She asked, "How can I respectfully engage with farmers as a mental health slash peer support provider in a way that feels supportive rather than intrusive, especially considering their strong sense of independence?"
I think one of the things is we shared the organizations to go through, maybe sitting down in those meetings and having that awareness that you're a safe person in that community, that you're not there to be intrusive. You want to be that helping hand to those people. I think sometimes meeting them where they're at, Bridget shared that. I know those were her words on that slide. Is, you know, sometimes you have to go where they are, whether it's one of our county extension offices or our farm service agency or the pork producers board meeting. Again, making your services available in a place where they're going. They might not reach out to you right then and there, but I think that's a good way in the back door, in the safe space, and that's where my role started. Is I'm the safe space for people to say, hey, these people are okay to work with.
Yeah, and I think too, we have trained a lot of like soil and water conservation. If you're not sure what those are, we've trained a lot of extension employees in mental health first aid. Like my husband works for Natural Resource Conservation Services, Farm Service Agency. We've trained a lot of them in the mental health first aid. So they're familiar with it. That doesn't mean they're comfortable talking about it to their farmers. But what I have seen in the field is if, like, I'll just use a Dark County person because I work a lot with a Dark County extension agent. So if Caleb or Caden says, hey, I know Jennifer from the local recovery board, if he's able to say that person's name, then that farmer is more likely to trust Jennifer from the local recovery board than just saying like go to the local recovery board, right? Like those farmers want somebody they can trust. And so if they're able to go to the person that they trust and then that person's able to give them a name and say that, that makes a much bigger difference. But yeah, like a lot of farm bureaus are doing like it's just a similar thing to like, blood pressure checks, right? Like they're having those people in these conversations in these regular meetings. So it's about reaching out to those, like you said, Sarah, backdoor kind of people. And it might take months, years, right? But they'll come back. They always do. I get them all the time that say, like, oh, it's you again. And I'm like, yeah, but you're here again.
That's great. Thank you both. Another question we had, and I don't know if you guys feel comfortable answering this, but do you have any ideas about what legislators can do and how can they step in and help our farmers?
Pass a farm bill. Oh,
So I think it's important to look at, there are different, that health insurance front, the cost of that, and making sure that even though you have health insurance, sometimes your mental health services aren't always covered. I think that's something legislatively that needs to be talked about, that, you know, farmers will go if there's a broken arm. Now, they won't go to have their blood pressure checked usually, and I'm being stereotypical, and they don't like those health checks. But again, helping them have that opportunity where it's not so expensive and not available. I also think being able to push people in rural communities to do a rotation. Maybe you never want to work in a rural community, but you might find that joy. And so when we look at our college level programs, whether it's a social worker, whether it's a counselor, having a rotation in a rural community as they get experience, I think is one of the things that would be an opportune legislative type program.
Thank you, Sarah. We had another question from Lauren come through. She asked, as a suicide prevention educator going into schools and informing on these topics in rural communities, how can I break down the stigma around conversations of mental health?
I think that this is a really good uh, ask. I think or a conversation, what I've experienced, and Sarah, probably something similar, is that our youth want to talk about it. I think it's just about allowing them the space to talk about it. And what I've experienced from both youth and from an adult that lost her parents when she was younger, that were in kind of like a bigger space in the agriculture community where she spotted some of the warning signs and symptoms when she was younger, and felt like she couldn't say anything because she didn't feel like she had like the empowerment to do so. I think just like letting the youth know, like, you do have that power. It is okay to say something, right? Like, your words matter. And I think that youth want to hear that, right? Like, your voice matters. And your voice matters when it comes to protecting your family and your parents. And I think that youth don't feel validated. But every time I've taught teen mental health first aid, whether it be for the youth, right? The youth are like, I'm so glad we're talking about this because I'm struggling myself or my friends. But also, they've said to me, like, I've noticed all of these signs in my parents and in my family, but I don't feel like I can say anything to anybody. So, who can I talk to about it? Like, you're the first person I felt like I can talk to about it. So, just empowering them that their voice does matter and is important before something happens.
I
Is there
think,
anything you would say, Sarah?
yeah, and I agree. I think one of the things is our schools have become so we are teaching to a test at times. We have so many things to get through. There's not time for kids to be kids.
Mm,
I just did a training, a QPR training with a local elementary, middle school, and high school in our county. And one of the things I shared with them is, have you ever thought of those days where, as a teacher, it would be nice to not be able to give homework just for a week? And again, as a former teacher, I know how hard and challenging that gets. But I said these kids are going so many different directions and so many different things that they need some of that downtime. But it's also looking at that from a community standpoint, that how young do we start our kids in all these different organizations? That mental stress. And again, they shared that, well, I didn't even realize. I thought my guidance counselor did things like scheduling my schedule and doing testing. And again, I'm working with high school kids, um, and helping people get into college and those things. They didn't realize they were there truly for some of that counseling and that opportunity. And so through Teen Mental Health First Aid, and I would agree with Bridget, just allowing your people to come in and help those kids. It's usually a 6 session, 45-minute length. But one of the things I can share this year is I'm just finishing, tomorrow will be our last day in one of our local high schools with a class. And we ended up having 12 sessions, and the kids have grown. They said this has been better than any class we've had in high
yeah.
school because we need this and we don't know how to deal.
Yeah. They've asked me to come back every year to the same class. Like a group will graduate, but they'll be like, because it's 10 through 12. So they'll get me sent back again. And they're like, please come back.
Yep.
We've got two more questions. I know we only have 2 minutes left. I'd love to try to get them
Okay.
both answered if we can, but if not, we
Sure.
can always have them follow up with you guys via email. The first one is from Kara. She asked that they have a lot of experience dealing with people that have been diagnosed with terminal illness and then that causing death by suicide. So, do we have any suggestions about how we can combat that connection, I guess?
That is hard, but I don't think there
Yeah.
is support groups when you're dealing with terminal illness in our rural communities, and I think that's one of the things. Is again
Yeah.
having people take on those roles. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think just watching for those signs, being an advocate, whether it's for the person that's terminally ill or the family and friends, just being that watch person, right? To spot those warning signs. There are support groups that you can be in, or, starting therapy early because it is like that early grief stages, right? You're already experiencing grief and loss before it happens. So normalizing getting therapy right away.
Yeah, that's great. And then the last question I have is this attendee said, I have found that using language that aligns with farmers is helpful, saying things like stress over suicide prevention just to start the conversation. What has been your experience, or what suggestions do you have related to language specifically? I know the Farm Bureau did a Check Your Engine campaign for mental health awareness. It was a great tool from a source that has credibility with the farming and agriculture community. Are you aware of any other similar campaigns?
There are actually a lot of good campaigns out there. I know 988 has some great campaigns talking through those things. We have some resources that we have developed and it's called Starting the Conversation with Farmers. And again, it's not in this training, obviously, today because we're out of time, but I think those are things, if you reach out to us, we can share some of those, whichever attendee you are. Our information is on the screen now, and that's being shared.
Yes, I will include both of your emails in our follow-up email. Ladies, thank you so much. This presentation was just chock full of incredible information, and we know how important this topic is. So thank you both for your time and educating all of us today. As a reminder for all of our attendees, you're going to receive that follow-up email afterward with a link to the post-webinar survey, which you do have to take if you'd like CE credits or a certificate of attendance, as well as the slides and Sarah and Bridget's email. I also wanted to share that our January webinar is going to be about cyberbullying and reducing bullying online and protecting our youth and what that can look like for suicide prevention. It's going to be on January 14th at 10 a.m., and I'll include a link to register for that in the email as well. We hope to see you all again next month. Thank you so much for your participation today, and I hope you all have a safe and healthy holiday season, and we will see you all in 2026.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all. Have a great day.